You're listening to The Rule of Law, the educational podcast sponsored by Allrise, where we focus on the intersection of law, technology, and storytelling. And now, here's your host, Lauren Round.
Welcome to Rule of Law. In today's episode, we sit down with Stacey Dougan, former attorney, psychotherapist, and founder of Stacey Dougan Counseling and Consulting. We discuss the root causes behind declining attorney well-being, how to carefully consider leaving the practice of law, and strategies to take your mental well-being into your own hands. Stacey, welcome to the show. Where are you recording from?
I am recording from Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, I'm not far away from you. I'm in Savannah, so a short 3-hour car drive. But welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we always, before we dive in, we have a lot of material to get to. But before we get to that, we always start the show with a quick icebreaker to get to know you. So your question is, what is one book or TV show or podcast that you are really into right now?
Oh gosh, that is a tough one because I actually have a reputation for being a podcast curator. I love podcasts. Well, I'll tell you a book that I really love. I've read it. I'm not reading it now, but I've read it and I've gone back to it many times. And I love the title of it, which is called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's written by a neuroscientist that explains our nervous system and how it operates in really humorous and accessible terms. And so that's one book that I love to recommend to folks. And I've gotten a lot of use out of.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that because I would never have connected that book title to the subject matter. So I will have to add that to my reading list.
I think his name is Robert Sapolsky. He's a professor. He's been around for a really long time. And again, has just a really great sense of humor. So highly recommend.
Okay, awesome. We'll definitely add that. Well, I have a bunch of questions that I want to get into, but if you don't mind first, just getting us started by telling us a little bit about you and your background and kind of your journey from practicing law to now counseling and consulting.
Sure. So as you know, I'm a psychotherapist in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a private practice here. I started in the legal profession in 1991, and I started out, even when I was in law school, I was a public interest fellow, and I did a lot of work with legal aid and legal services, and I fell in love with a very interesting and complicated area of the law, which is habeas corpus, and particularly death penalty work. And so when I did that work in law school, I did a lot. It was mostly mitigation work, trying to, present to the jury the story of the client so that they could consider that in mitigating punishment. And that was the beginning of my love for learning people's stories. And there's an area of the law called therapeutic jurisprudence, which really attracts me because what I've learned throughout my legal career, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a moment, is that the legal system people can quote win in the legal system and they can be pulverized in the process. And so being able to be heard and seen in this process, I have found it to be very important with my clients. So after law school, I started at the public defender's office. And again, I really wanted to present the whole story and contextualize whatever it was that my clients were charged with. Because as Brian Stevenson said, nobody is the worst thing that they've ever done. And so stories, again, have just always been really important. I went to Greenberg Traurig and I was a civil litigation associate, which was a really tough thing for me to do because stories were not quite as relevant or important to me in that way. But while at GT, I did a lot of work for on behalf of battered women and their children. And I would recruit lawyers to do that work as well. And what I would say to the lawyers is, even though we're not social workers, we need to think like social workers because our clients have a lot of unmet needs. And so they're not going to just profusely thank you for winning a restraining order when they don't know how their kids are going to be fed, where they're going to live, and so on. And so even then, so after I did that project at GT, I was the assistant general counsel to the firm and a shareholder. And in that role, I was dealing with really stressed out lawyers who were trying to clear conflicts, who might have been dealing with actual or threatened malpractice claims, employment issues that had come up in the firm. So again, trying to walk with them to help them calm their nervous system so that we could get the full story. And then, I could advise them in the best way I could. And similarly, then after Greenberg Traurig, I went to a law firm in Atlanta and became their chief professional development officer. And again, working with lawyers who were trying to develop their careers. They were dealing with work-life conflict, diversity, trying to, roadmap relationships. And so that's been the through line. And even though I did not necessarily see it in 2017, I graduated with my master's in mental health counseling, and I came out and it was like everything I just described was preparing me to be where I've landed, which is to be a psychotherapist for lawyers. So I know that was a lot, but it really was just sort of this through line that led me to where I am now. And I'm really grateful for it because I love what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, that's quite the journey. And I imagine a lot of those experiences, especially being in a public defender's office, sounds like some of the most challenging legal work, especially when you're looking at it through the lens of having all of the unmet needs aside from the legal problems. Really challenging job to start with after law school, for sure. Yeah. Well, I want to get into some questions about kind of overall mental health and well-being in the legal industry, which you're an expert in. And that's why we were so excited to have you on. And we actually haven't talked about this topic really at all on the show yet. And I think a lot of attorneys, see the numbers that are published around the legal profession with things like substance abuse, rates of anxiety and depression, and they are high among legal professionals. And I think there are probably some obvious things that contribute to that, like stress and not taking care of your health. But in your years of working with attorneys, what are some of sort of less obvious stressors that are really contributing to these numbers and the decline in mental health among legal professionals?
Well, I think that a lot of these things can be, quote, less obvious because they get normalized. And so one of the metaphor, and I don't know where it came from, but it's the frog that's in the pot. And, first of all, the water's lukewarm and then the temperature keeps rising. It's really a good metaphor for lawyers because many lawyers, for years before they ever even go to law school, it was all about striving, achieving, attaining, excelling. And that certainly doesn't go away when we become lawyers, right? Law school, accentuates that. And so just this churning, this grinding becomes the way that's our default system. And what I find is that it creates a lot of real deep suffering. And most of the time when people come to therapy, what they tell me is that what I've always done isn't working anymore, because it almost sort of insulated them from the grind. And then they start to feel it. They start to realize that I am paying a price here and I don't know what to do because all I know is what I've always done. So I think it's less obvious to the person affected by it. We might be able to see it, but I think that it is a default state where we just continue to engage in the same behaviors that got us where we got. And suddenly the rewards don't feel as affirming, and the work becomes harder. And because we're not taking care of ourselves and we're not stopping and slowing down, it just sort of, it compounds on itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I've seen that firsthand. It's easy to kind of just keep doing what you know how to do and what you've always done, even if it's not getting you the result that you want anymore. But I mean, change is really hard. And that parlays perfectly into my next question, which is around how you help attorneys navigate change, because I think we're reaching a point where even if an attorney says, I've been grinding like this since I was in law school and this is, worked for me up until this point, but I don't really want to change. This is how things have always been. I'm just going to keep doing what I've always done. It seems like we're getting to a place where that may not even be an option anymore with AI and with how rapidly the legal industry is changing. So, I mean, do you work with attorneys on that too? Like how you navigate change, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and how attorneys can kind of process that without just worrying about the unknown every day?
Sure. I mean, that's what I spend my time doing. So, what I really love to teach lawyers about is the neurobiology of our stress response. And so what we know about the brain is that it abhors uncertainty. And what are we confronted with constantly is uncertainty, whether you're talking about what's happening politically, whether you're talking about AI, whether you're talking about firms, so many firms. I mean, when I was a partner at Greenberg Traurig, it was almost like getting tenure. You sort of felt like, okay, you've gotten there. You sort of have security that really protects you. It's not like that anymore. It's almost like lawyers have to justify their existence every day, even people that have been with their firms or in this profession for 20, 30 years. And so everybody is confronted with change. And so what I like to help lawyers understand, and it is not intuitive, but this is what the neuroscience teaches us, is that the body contains so much information that we are so cut off from, because the legal profession, really it highlights and values what's from the neck up, the big brains that got us to where we are. But what the neuroscience tells us is that we know that there's communication between the body and the brain, right? And that's through the vagus nerve. What we know is that is bilateral communication. The body is sending nerves to the brain, and the brain is sending, messages to the body. What we know is that 80% of that messaging is coming from the body up to the brain. So when we cut ourselves off from what our body is telling us, when we get that clench in our gut or that tightness in our jaw or the stiffness in our joints, that is our body giving us information. But if we don't know how to listen to it or interpret it, then all of that information is lost. So I really like to help lawyers understand, because if I don't know about you, but if I try to calm down thinking starting from my brain, I don't know how to do that. Like, I can't calm down. But if I know that I can calm down by putting my feet on the floor, by feeling my butt in the chair, by breathing, by getting a drink of water, by moving my body, then that's very empowering, because that gives me a lot of options in terms of how do I calm myself? How do I calm the nervous system? And so that's what I really like to help clients understand, is that the only thing we can control is ourselves. And lawyers don't like to hear that, because we have earned the label of being control freaks, right? And so when you think about it, we can spend so much time trying to control, why is opposing counsel acting like that? Why did the judge rule that way? Why is the partner giving me this work that could have been given to me 2 days ago and now it's an emergency? We keep our focus externally, and we start spinning, and we're not checking in with our body. What does our body need? How is my sleep? Did I have water? Am I fatigued? Am I hungry? And so it's really empowering to understand that every time we bring the focus back to ourselves and then check in with our body, that's where our power is. And we don't have to spin the way that we do so much.
And it seems like, you certainly don't learn how to check in with yourself in law school or as a young associate, at least at most firms. And it seems like it's way beyond kind of learning how to check in with yourself. It's actually unlearning how you've been trained to go along the way, because you're actually rewarded for doing the opposite. You're rewarded for, 80-hour work weeks, which is not normal. Eating at your desk, staying at your desk all day, not normal. So it seems like it's kind of two pieces, like learning what you should do, but then also like rewiring your brain to unlearn what you've been doing for the last however many years.
And that is such a great point, because we are having to unwind a lot of learned behavior. And what I like to suggest to my clients, the legal profession can be brutal. It can take a lot out of us. Sometimes, though, we don't try to get our needs met. So, for example, I was talking to a coaching client at one point, and junior associate who no longer goes to Pilates or yoga because she doesn't want to leave her phone for an hour because she might get a call. And so in that kind of situation, what I'll say to a client is, let's talk about whether that you've really gotten that message. Is that a message that you've actually received, or is that a perception that you have based on how people talk about the firm? Because a lot of times we really are operating on what our perceptions are, the stories we're telling ourselves. And so sometimes we don't even allow ourselves to experiment. What happens if I'm away from my phone for an hour? Do things blow up? Most of the time they don't. So we sometimes really exacerbate our sense of powerlessness, and nobody feels good when they feel powerless. So my favorite quote is from Viktor Frankl, and it says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom." And I share that quote with every client because we are affected by so much stimuli, so much incoming. And so often we go into a spin of reactivity because we're in that default mode. We're not sleeping well. We're not eating well. We're not exercising. We're not connecting with people that we love. And so we react. And I don't know about you, but I very rarely feel good when I spin into reactivity. And what that quote reminds us is that we can respond to the circumstances. But in order to respond, most of the time we need to pause. Most of the time we need to breathe. We need to give ourselves just a moment. And then we say, what is in my power? How do I want to respond in this moment? And when we can do that, we generally feel better about what that response looks like. So I always say to my clients, where is your power here? What do you have control over? And it's a practice of coming back again and again. Where is my control here? Because that's where it has to start, because I can't control what the CEO of a law firm is thinking or doing. Or I can't control how opposing counsel comes off, but I can control how I respond to that.
Deploying new software technology can disrupt familiar workflows and processes, and it often comes with a steep learning curve for the employees in your law firm. We get it, but it doesn't have to be that way. All Rise is a comprehensive law practice management system deeply integrated with the Microsoft tools and technology you're already familiar with, so no steep learning curve is required. And because All Rise is a modular software platform, you can deploy only the specific capabilities you need when you need them. Your choice. If you want to streamline internal operations, boost staff productivity, and deliver superior client service, then take a close look at the AI-powered All Rise platform. It's time to experience software innovation that enables practice excellence. Learn more at allrise.ai.
And yeah, I know we're talking about, focusing on what you can control, but I also am curious your thoughts on kind of maybe larger structural changes that could help the legal industry in general, because yes, absolutely, attorneys should listen to their bodies and focus on what they can control. But I mean, some of these attorneys are also employers, and they are responsible for a team of people that might also be struggling or feeling this way or falling into the traps. So, I mean, have you thought about it all? Like, what role should lawyers as employers especially play in promoting the mental health of their employees, especially young associates? I mean, like, what is that role? Should there be any role besides giving space, or kind of what would your ideal setup look like?
That is such a big question, because we both know that the legal profession is not exactly amenable to radical change. And that is something that is it can be really frustrating sometimes, and talk about feeling powerless. But yet we have seen the research come out that we've all seen, and they're actually updating the 2016 research that told us about all of the mental health issues that lawyers are dealing with. I think that you need to have a critical mass of people at the upper echelons, and we're talking about like law firms, right? At the upper echelons of law firms that really care about these issues, that consult with the appropriate people to audit their policies. What do our leave policies look like? What do our work from home policies look like? Like, for example, working from home. I mean, we're just finally emerging from this COVID. And right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of firms just sort of having a blanket policy of everybody's got to get it back into the office. And, people really, they structured their lives around the hybrid working. And I'm not saying that firms shouldn't have people come back into the office. I think we lose and we lost a lot around that. And yet these blanket, edicts just cause people again to feel very powerless. And so that to me is emblematic of sometimes how firms just don't pay attention to what's happening with their people. And most firms have invested so much money in, training and cultivating their lawyers. And then when somebody has a problem, they need to be able to be there to attend to it. So I think that, there's a lot of really good research going on about how policies can be more progressive. I think from an anecdotal standpoint, one of the most powerful things that can happen is people at the higher echelons of firms acknowledging that they see therapists, acknowledging that they've had times where they've gone through burnout, acknowledging if they're on an antidepressant, because there can be a separation. What I see with my clients is people that struggle with mental health issues often feel so isolated and alone. And one of the most powerful things you can do for someone is to show them they're not alone by bringing community around it. So, I'm not an expert. I'm not an organizational psychologist, but I do think that talking about it, normalizing it, having policies that explicitly apply to mental health issues, and acknowledging what an issue is, destigmatizing it, and having resources around, having the partners and people in management know what the resources are available, so that they're not sitting there going, I don't know what to do because this person has just told me that they have, bipolar disorder and they need help. And I have no idea what resources are even available. There was a Modern Love episode early on when it first started, where Anne Hathaway played a lawyer that had bipolar disorder. And it was so powerful because it just showed how, because she was so alone, she was really unable, she couldn't manage it. And then when she had this amazing conversation with her boss really attended to her and said, we can work this out. But a lot of people are terrified to talk to their bosses about things like that because they feel like it's the first step in being, shown the door.
It's such a good point that it a lot of times has to start from the top down, because I've experienced that anecdotally too. Is an organization will have policies around, when you're off of work, don't look at your phone, take your time. Or if you need to leave early to go to a therapy appointment or a fitness appointment or whatever, that's okay. And when the leaders actually do that, when they're actually not responding to you when they're on their time off, or if they say, I'm leaving early for a therapy appointment, that really gives a permission slip to everybody else. Whereas if the leader is responding 24/7, that sets the expectation that everyone has to do that, even if that's not the policy. So yeah, I think that's such an important point for organizations. Yeah. I want to move on to talk a little bit about a related but a separate topic, which is transitioning from the practice of law to another profession, because I know you also work with attorneys through that transition. And I think that is just such a relevant question to all of our listeners, because every attorney has thought at some time about leaving the profession. And it's a really tough call to make given the investment that's required to become an attorney in this country. So can you talk a little bit about maybe how you distinguish between an attorney who is unhappy because of the way that they're practicing law versus someone who maybe would be better off transitioning to a different industry, and maybe the legal industry wasn't the right one for them.
Sure. I think that, like you said, I mean, people, this is such an incredible investment that we make to go to law school and, start practicing law. And of course, there's the financial aspect of it and everything else. And, I will tell you, I would say at least 12 times a year, I get calls from lawyers from all around the country who want to do what I do. They're like, how did you do it? Why did you do it? And I love that because, there are a lot of lawyers who want a therapist who understands their life. And so that is really particularly important. So I always take those calls and I always schedule time to talk to people like that and tell them they'll pay it forward by doing it when they if they decide to become a therapist. I have so many clients. A lot of my clients work in big law because I have that history from my own career, and it's important to them that somebody can understand the environment of the big law, because most people, like several of my clients, have seen other therapists who have said to them, well, you need to work less. And they're like, you don't understand. And so sort of what I alluded to before, about a lot of my clients say, I don't think I'm happy doing this, but I need to really flesh that out. And I help them with that process. I accompany them. I walk with them. I never give advice because that's not what a therapist does. But I want to give them the space to really explore whether this is the right decision for them. And most of the time, like I said earlier, it's really about how much of this is self-imposed, how much of this is based on the stories that you're telling yourself, because there are firms that are really rigid, very, difficult, especially if you do have mental health issues. It's just a really difficult environment. That might not be the right firm. Does that mean you leave the profession? Not necessarily. It's really an exploration. And I want people to really inquire and interrogate how much of this is within me that I can change, because the Buddhists say wherever you go, there you are. So a lot of times it is within us that we need to operationalize some change no matter where we are. And so what is it that is causing you to be unhappy? When it's environmental, look at what that environment is demanding. What are your perceptions of the demands? Let's do some reality testing. Are those actually coming from the organization, or are they your perception of what's required? So it's really a very individualized, customized process in terms of exploring. And most people balk at that kind of exploration because they want to do what they want to do now. But the truth is that if you're ambivalent and you're not sure whether the law is for you, you're not sure whether you want to leave the law, the worst thing you can do is force yourself into a decision around that, because the chances are it's not the right decision. One of the things that I really encourage my clients to tap into, which again is not really valued in our profession, is their own intuition, their own sense of knowing. We so often we're bulldozing our way through our days and our weeks and our months because things have to get done, and we have these assignments and we've got client demands and what have you. But you need to have the quietude to sit with your own intuition, to really have a sense of certainty. Is this really what I want to do? Is this for me? So I just really try to guide people in that process, and then they need to figure it out from there. I can't tell them because I don't know. I've had clients say to me, "Can't you just tell me what you think?" And I'll be like, "I really can't, because number one, that's not my role, and number two, I don't know. I don't know what your path is supposed to look like, but I'll be here and help you figure it out. That's for sure."
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's just such an individual decision, and even something like going to law school. I mean, young people in college who are thinking about it ask attorneys all the time if they should go to law school or not. And I would never tell a young person whether to go or not. I would say these are the positives and these are the negatives, but it's just such an individual decision. So that's such a good point. For attorneys who maybe have allowed themselves that time and come to the decision that, this is not for me. This is not what I want to do the rest of my life, but feel stuck because they think, a lot of limiting beliefs. Like, this is what I was trained to do. It's really specific. These skills aren't transferable somewhere else. Are there any sort of practical tips that you could give on how to create space to maybe consider a new career path or get out of those limiting beliefs that I trained to be a lawyer, so that's all there is for me and I'm stuck and I can't transition?
Sure. Well, I love, your phrasing of limiting beliefs, because that is really critical, because when we have limiting beliefs, that can become our reality. And so one of the things I love to say to my clients is, what's the evidence for that? Let's interrogate it. How using legalese can sometimes be really helpful when you're trying to talk these things through with lawyers. But what is it that we learn to do as lawyers? We learn to research. We learn to think analytically and critically. We learn how to write. We learn how to counsel clients. We learn how to deal with people that are, our seniors and our juniors. We learn how to manage our lives within these organizations that are very complex and very confounding sometimes. Those skill sets feel very transferable to me. And so I never thought, I didn't even stop to think about whether my skills as a lawyer would transfer into being a psychotherapist. Of course they have, but what I thought of was, what is my passion? What is it that I want to do? And frankly, when I left after my role as the chief professional development officer, I got laid off because the firm had gotten acquired by another firm. And this was in 2009 when the economy was not doing so well. And what was important to me, and what's important, and the research bears this out, it is having a sense of meaning and purpose attached to your work. Now, I will say that isn't critical for every single person. There are people who are like, this is the means to an end. I make really good money. It's prestigious. I meet interesting people. I do interesting work. But that can also be, your purpose. And if you feel connected to what you're doing, I think you're more likely to be happy. We need to make sure that our values are aligned with what it is we're waking up and doing every day. And in full transparency, throughout my life, I've made ample use of psychotherapy for my own benefit. And so when I started to think about what I wanted to do, psychotherapy had helped me through my life. It's something that I thought maybe I would be good at. And those, I had no idea. I wasn't thinking about the transferability of my legal skills, but they certainly have. And then I get to work with lawyers, and it all kind of comes together in that way too. So I think that for people who are thinking about leaving the profession, they have skills. Like, let's just assume that. And when you have these limiting beliefs, ask yourself, what is the evidence for that? What is the evidence to say that all these skills I've attained only work in a legal environment? And it's called cognitive behavioral therapy, but that's a way of really using your brain. That's one thing that we don't have to really necessarily check in with the body. It's the brain. What is the evidence? And just inquire, like, what is it that I think that I would be good at? And chances are what you've done up until this point will help you do what you want to do better.
I really love that framing, how you put that, being connected to your work versus this big purpose word, because I feel like that word is used a lot in kind of the professional development space, but especially for attorneys, it's like if I'm doing super technical transactional work, it's hard to link that to this big word of purpose, where we think, oh, it has to be like something nonprofit, or I can only have purpose in my doing pro bono work or something. So I like that phrasing much better. If you're connected to your work, not everyone needs to be like serving in a philanthropic way or something to have purpose.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And Lauren, because you're right. And so you're actually helping me rethink when I use that word, because it can be daunting to say, what is your purpose? What is your mission? Because what the research also tells us is that most of our lives have a lot of facets. And, having that purpose with a capital P doesn't necessarily even have to come through work. It can come through being organized, being in your community, being a parent, caregiving in some way. There's so many ways that we can really honor what it is that's important to us. And it doesn't have to only come from work. So I like the idea of being connected. So I appreciate you pointing that out, because I think that's really important. It can be daunting when it's like, well, I don't know if this is my purpose, I don't see quite like that.
Yes, exactly. Well, we always like to have some element of, really practical steps on this show. So you've kind of sprinkled some tips and tricks throughout, but if you could leave attorneys with one thought or tip on what they can do today, an actionable item to start on a better path for their mental health and well-being, what would you leave them with?
I'm going to cheat by saying I want to say focus on sleep, because everybody minimizes it, and it is the most foundational aspect of our overall health and well-being. So I'm slipping that one in there, but that's not my answer. My real answer would be breathing, because our breath is available to us 24/7. And the research is abundantly clear that we can actually work with our nervous system through our breath. And the easiest takeaway would be that when we find ourselves activated, when we find ourselves like ready to go into that reactive spin, if we breathe through our nose for 3 to 4 beats, hold it for a beat, and then exhale for 5 to 6 to 7, every time we elongate the exhale, that taps into what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the calming mechanism in our brain. And so most of us are activated a lot of the time. And so the breath is the best way. And it really, it's amazing how well it works, because it is connected to that system. And so I would say start with the breath.
Okay, that's perfect. Yeah. And I love the connection to your brain and how you're describing it almost from a biological standpoint, because I can hear the skepticism from some in the legal industry about breath work. Sounds like kind of woo-woo to some people. So I really like the biology connection. Well, Stacey, thank you so much again for joining us. And what is the best way for listeners to follow you or learn more about your work?
I would just say go to my website, stacydougan.com. I'm on social media, but sort of incognito. But I'm not one of those lawyers that, listen to me, not one of those therapists that like have a big thing on Instagram and things like that. So just go to my website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you again, Stacey.
Thank you. So nice to talk to you.
Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
And join us again for another Rule of Law podcast from All Rise.